I'm really excited to introduce Scott today. We go way back. He, I think it was back in the middle 80s, right after I'd started the shop. And Scott, he was just starting out with a hobby in his backyard. He had an old barn back there, and he took John Ammon, maybe many of you may remember. In fact, I texted him hoping that he would come online. He introduced Scott and his family to me, and we found out we had something in common. He was on a piece of property that my grandfather used to log and had a pond there. And so it was really kind of a fun thing that we found out the first time that we met, that we had this family heritage of mine that goes way, way back. And Grandpa's still there at Mountain View Cemetery and watches over me every single time I go to Scott's Winery, because that's a hard place to stay away from. They have raptors there. They have all the most beautiful view of Mount Hood, and he's put all of those grapes in himself, and it's just a fun place to visit. And I had my 76th birthday there, of which I had, I think, 76 people there. And Scott and Scott and Annie both were just so generous in letting me have this party at their winery. So I also, a long time ago, painted a little Porsche that he had that was another thing that kept us in touch with each other. And trying to think, we went on a fishing trip together. We have this fishing thing going on for some time here at the club. We had a speaker, remember our speaker, Bucky Buckstotter or whatever his name was. And but Scott and his wife and myself and John and a bunch of us all went down the Middle Fork of the Salmon, and that was where I caught the guy's ear. that was our person. Anyway, I want to introduce Scott, and he's going to tell us a little bit about his background and what he's doing with his winery, which all of you should put this on the list because it is the place to go. Best Pinot Noir ever. It's the only one I can drink and don't get a headache. Scott, come and talk to us.
Thank you, Lori. As I was reminiscing earlier, I met Lori when I was in my 20s. I'm now on Medicare, so that tells you how long we've known each other and been friends. And through your kind offer to meet with the East Portland Rotary Club today. I just have some remarks, but I hope there'll be questions as well. You know, my goal is to kind of share a bit of the journey that we've been on with a hobby that got way out of control. Being a winemaker is a real privilege. It's something that has now become our family's, lifeblood. We make a living at it, as do the about 8 people who work for us. So we've created jobs, but it's also been a real privilege to grow up with the Oregon wine industry. Hopefully I got this clicker working for me.
It changed here.
There we go. Over the last 28 years, we've been making wine commercially, but we've, as I said, also grown up with the Oregon wine industry. When we started the winery, there were about 150 of us. There are now over 700 wineries in Oregon, in the last 3 decades, and twice as many vineyards as that. I forget the latest economic impact study. You can find that on the Oregon Wine Board's website, but it's billions. I think the number is $5 billion contribution to the economy, both directly and indirectly. Both Annie and I are people that like to get involved and do things collectively. I was a founding director of the Oregon Wine Board, making that a semi-independent state-run board that covers the interests of wineries throughout the state. I'm also currently a director of the Willamette Valley Wineries Association, and have been president of something called Oregon Pinot Camp, as has my wife Annie. So it's been great to get connected with folks that, when I was a hobbyist winemaker, people that I worshiped. And now I'm texting with David Adelsheim about research projects that we're doing with the University of Burgundy Dijon. So all of this has given us kind of the impossible dream. I don't know that if I were starting out today, we'd be able to buy land, graft our own grapes, learn from others, to where we're now making world-class wines, all of which are more than 90 points in their critics' evaluations. I pinch myself. It's really a blessing. We have a vineyard, a 30-acre property, about 20 acres of grapes. I'll show you some pictures of it. That I farm personally. My parents worked very hard to make sure all the kids got college educations. They grew up on farms. They didn't want us to do that. They moved away. They got their own day jobs. My father was a research chemist. My mom was a school teacher. And now I'm backsliding, right? But I love it. I love working the soil and growing a product that brings people joy. Wine. Let me show you some pictures. And also talk about, the questions. Raptors, do you guys have dinosaurs on your vineyard? I'll be patient. I think I put it. Raptor Ridge is named after the birds of prey. Raptors are hawks, owls, kestrels, eagles. And we noticed when we bought the property that there were all manner of these birds there day and night. This is a little drone shot of the 20-acre parcel. As Lori mentioned, I was one of those crazy people that crazy or cheap, instead of buying the grapevines, I took cuttings off of vines that from wineries that I loved and did my own grafting. This in the foreground is the first block that we planted now 22 years ago. My pocketbook needed to recover a bit, and then we planted the second block. So each of these blocks is about 6,000 grapevines. So myself and two others would spend the winter doing something called an omega graft. It's like a jigsaw puzzle cut where you marry the fruiting wood on top of American rootstock that's evolved to be resistant to the diseases and insects that we have in our soil. I think they do the same thing with roses. You have to ask a rosarian to learn that. But so this is grafting to get the kind of wine producing budwood on top of rootstock that has properties of survival. So after the first block was planted and our pocketbooks regained their wind, we were able to fund the second block. That was 19 years ago, and then the third block was about 17 years ago. So for the decade of the 2000s, this was under development. And at the same time, we were buying in wine from area growers that now are some of the oldest, most respected vineyards and the most experienced. So that is a real blessing as well, to be able to buy fruit from Dick Shea and Meredith Mitchell Vineyard and Di Chris. So to the Raptors, we call our vineyard Tuscawallamy. Tuscawallamy Estate. You might see it hidden on a wine label. We don't talk about it too much. It is a word from the first peoples who lived in the area, and it means the place where the owls dwell. Because we also have quite a few barn owls and barred owls and great horned owls. We work with the local Raptor Rescue Center, and if they have birds that have been rehabilitated, we're one of the release sites. I think I have a shot here of Annie and I were releasing 3 rehabilitated barn owls one day. This is a barred owl, and that's the barn owl up close. And they go after the voles and moles that we don't like chewing on our grapevines. So it's kind of a nice partnership. We also pride ourselves on the relationships we have with some of these famous wineries all around the northern Willamette Valley. Maybe I'll start at the south. So down by Salem, Zenith Vineyard, Temperance Hill, Crawford Beck Vineyard, and Yale Amity Hills. This is a very different type of soil and a very different sort of aspect ratio to the sun and the wind. Eola is named after the Aeolian god of wind. There's a notch in the coast range called the Van Duzer Corridor, and every night the winds howl and blow on the Eola Hills, and that causes the grapevines to sort of put on a thicker winter coat. They have a thicker skin, so the grapes will have more tannin, more color, more structure, compared to maybe back up here in the north near Hillsborough. Dion Vineyard is protected from those coast winds. If anything, it's a hotter site. You get the eastern Washington winds coming through the gorge, ripening more quickly. I won't read all of them to you, but the point I'm trying to get across is the blessing of the Willamette Valley having different soils, whether it's volcanic or ancient seafloor, or in our case here in the Chehalem Mountains, these soils that were blown in through the catastrophic floods, the Missoula floods that you may have heard about. All of these produce Pinot Noir of different flavors and textures and aromas and colors. So you get kind of an artist's palette to blend from. And we do blend. We make about 4,000 cases of a single Pinot Noir called our Barrel Select that gets distributed nationally. Components of maybe all of these vineyards. But the other cool thing we do is we do vineyard designated wine. So if somebody's a real wine geek and they want to taste the differences between what's coming from McMinnville versus what's coming from the Yale Hills and whatnot, we've got all of those available in our tasting room. To talk a little bit about our business, when Lori met us, we were just commercializing. I think our first commercial vintage was about 800 cases in my former sheep barn. We grew to where we couldn't make anymore. We were just, it was a Rubik's Cube of moving barrels and fermenters around, and that was about 2,000 cases in the year 2000. We now make about 10,000 cases a year, so we've grown by a factor of 10. This is a shot of the winery floor. We ferment each block of each vineyard in its own separate fermenter, and we try to keep it under temperature control so that it doesn't get too hot, or we can keep it cold soaked. I was going to talk a bit about our business model here. Let me see if I can just use this and go page up. Does that work? Yes. So I was talking about these single vineyard wines a moment ago, tastes from the different soils. Those are collector's items, and they retail around $40 to $50 a bottle. Most of them are only available at our winery or online from the winery or to members of our wine clubs. We also do a very serious estate brut rosé. And if you stay with us long enough, and I haven't bored you, Lori has brought a bottle to share. There'd be little tastes for most of you. This is the moral equivalent of grower champagne. It's a specific block of our vineyard that we've completely changed the trellis system. We harvest, ferment the wine. We make a base wine. We then sterile filter that base wine and re-inoculate it with a special type of yeast and re-ferment in the bottle for 4 years. So it lays down for 4 years, building up all those bubbles, that creamy textures, those aromas. This is called method champenois, just the way the the same methods as the folks in Champaign use. So it's become a labor of love. This is about a 10-year-old project now. It's my get rich quick scheme. You know, put all your money and effort into it, and you don't see a penny for at least 4 years, while at the same time you have another 3 vintages in the bank behind you, in the cellar behind you. So these are our single vineyard and sparkling group rosé wines. Our mid tier is a collection of very interesting eclectic European varietals. When folks come to our tasting room, they go, "Oh, I love the Pinot Noir, but I didn't know you had Auxerrois. I didn't know that you had Gamay." We also are just now releasing something called Pastagran, which is a Burgundian co-fermentation of Pinot Noir and Gamay Noir. Fun, not too serious red wine. I call it a good hamburger wine. Goes with national eat whatever you want today. This is drink whatever you want. And then really the bulk of our wine is our $18 to $30 a bottle. We're known for our Pinot Gris. The Barrel Select Pinot Noir that I mentioned is a blend of about 9 different vineyards. And our Rosé and Gruner Veltliner. We were honored that Trader Joe's just this spring picked our Rosé. So if you go shopping at Trader Joe's, you'll see end stacks of Raptor Ridge Rosé wine, which is a really nice finish, one of the best rosés we've ever made. Perfect for this 94-degree weather this Sunday. Gruner Veltliner, he said. What is that? Does anybody know what a Gruner Veltliner is? Yeah, tell me.
Austrian bread.
Perfect. Austrian. It's an Austrian varietal.
Good acid. Great.
Zippy acidity, very fresh, great with raw bar. We love Gruner and oysters. Not many growers of Gruner in all of North America, let alone Oregon. I think there's maybe 5 of us growing Gruner Veltliner here in Oregon. So geeky, yes, but people love coming to our winery because they get a variety of things and get introduced to new things. I think the next slide you have seen, that was the fermentation parlor, as we call it.
It didn't say. On top.
You say so. I'll just do it here. How's that? Down. Gruner Veltliner. That's what I'm harvesting here. This looks like a posed shot, but it's not. It's me being super happy because harvest had just finished. The Gruner grapes are usually the last to come in. So each of these has about 1,000 pounds of grapes. It's a very good vintage. The fruit was beautiful. There was a photographer on site with a telephoto lens and caught me in a moment's bliss, bringing in about 10 tons of Gruner Veltliner from our state, but nothing as blissful as the next slide. I'm getting trained. Trainable. This I've talked about Annie. This is my beautiful wife Annie, and before I grew my gray-haired goatee. Annie joined me in life around 1996, and I told her, if you can stand a full season of vineyard, winery, and the business, then we have something to talk about. So in 97, I proposed, and we got married in 98. And she has built the national distribution channel for Raptor Ridge, starting from about 6 different states where we sell our wine, including Oregon, to now 32 different states. And so in the heartland where she grew up, I think she speaks their language because she's like the queen of Oklahoma. Everybody in Oklahoma knows Annie. Our wines are everywhere there. And I'm happy that other wineries like, oh, well, Oklahoma, why would I want to go there? Well, people have a lot of disposable income. They like the finer things in life, food, wine, good music, and it's lovely. So Oklahoma, Arkansas, her home state of Minnesota, as well as, yeah, New York, Boston, North and South Carolina, Florida, Texas. Still our number one state for distribution is Oregon, followed by, I think, California, and then the heartland states. But increasingly more people come directly to us, which is great. So over half our wine is sold right out of the tasting room, you know, both physically as well as virtually. So that's kind of my overview, and you've been very polite. We can open wine, and we can also, you know, I'd love to answer questions about, as I say, the journey, please.
Start right here, since I'm closest.
On this greener Winery variety, does that have a late picking to it? Since it's the last one picked, or is that just you don't worry about whether the weather's getting really cold or anything?
Oh, I always worry. The Gruner Veltliner ripens late. Every varietal has sort of its own pace that it's on. How much sunlight and warmth does it need to get to the perfect flavor, as well as harvest chemistry, you know, sugar and acidity. And it always seems to be the latest, and I think that's typical for that variety. The first thing to get picked is the Pinot Noir that we picked for our sparkling Brut Rosé, which is here. You harvest the sparkling wine, I call it leaner, so not as much sugar, because you don't want a lot of alcohol. Sugar converts to alcohol. You're not, oh, here you go, thank you. Careful. It's loaded now. So we're harvesting usually the sparkling wine first, and then we'll get into younger vineyards. Yeah.
Not his first uncorking.
Or younger vineyards or lower elevation vineyards ripen soon. So when a vineyard gets older, it's putting down deeper roots. It has more mass to the plant itself, and that somehow slows down the ripening process.
How much should you put in there for 20 tastes of that?
There's 22 ounces in the bottle, so an ounce.
7 ounce.
That's close to an ounce. That's 0.82 ounces.
The first 20 people get a taste. Really good.
Other questions? Please.
I noticed on your business plan, you list Tempranillo, but I'd heard that you had stopped doing Tempranillo. What's
Yeah.
the status of that?
We,
Because the ones that I tasted were very good.
yeah, we made Tempranillo from 2005 to 2016, and we have a little bit of the 2016 left from a wonderful vineyard down in the Rogue Valley in Southern Oregon called Folan Vineyard. And Scotty Folan, as he was called, the father, succumbed to Parkinson's. He would always drive my several tons up, you know, even with his shaking hand, a truck carrying 20 tons worth of wine. I said, Scott, you don't have to deliver the fruit personally, but no, that was the kind of guy he was. He passed away, and we're in a public setting here, so I'll just try to simplify and respect that the family was unsure what they wanted to do with the vineyard. They had their own winery, and it became hard to make a decision, so I just couldn't buy it anymore. And so I stopped. But thanks for the compliments on the Tempranillo. We love Tempranillo, and, you know, hearty steak or paella or something like that. I'll come to you next. Please.
You talked about taking clippings from other people or vineyards. Where did you get those from? And then are you using like heirloom seeds from those after all these years?
We took cuttings from Meredith Mitchell Vineyard. I liked the Pomard clone in Oregon. Yeah, so these were existing vineyards. Susie Gagne, who was at the time the winemaker for Airlie, she and her husband Colin had their own vineyard. They had a Wadensville clone. I use the term clone, and clone is just a plant propagator's term for how you propagate a plant and get exact DNA. And the way you do that is take a cutting. So that cutting is, you know, a snipping of a plant that has the same DNA, but a grapevine, one shoot will have maybe 20 buds on it. So that's 20 possible plants. So they're propagated by cutting plant material, even though the seeds, to your question, the seeds might be able to sprout a grape, but that's really not the way it's done. I don't think it's quite as viable as simply taking cuttings. Yeah, please.
Episode about wine industry where, as opposed to California, everyone's very competitive, but here in Oregon, wineries, vineyards were sharing techniques and grapes and all that to help each other become more successful.
Yeah, it's
If
true.
that's still being done.
The industry is extremely collaborative, and you know, Annie and I keep watching for potential change where we do become competitors with one another, but because we're very protective, we want that collaborative spirit to continue. And so far, so good. Why? Why are people in the Oregon grape business, wine business that way? I think, you know, 50 years ago when folks started out, they were considered crazy. And so because nobody had ever done it before, and the weather wasn't thought to be conducive to growing wine. So they helped each other out, and it's basically circling the wagons, everybody back to back, fighting the pests that we didn't know about, learning what clones would grow here. Nobody could afford an expensive press, so can we share? So that kind of bootstrapping mentality described the, you know, Dick Erath, Dick Ponzi, David Adelsheim, etc. It continued, I think, because as the world learned that fine wine can be grown in Oregon, the business caught on. But even now, Oregon wines are like 2% of what's consumed, sold in the United States. So it doesn't make sense to like fight with each other. You just convince somebody to stop drinking California Merlot, and your market share doubles. So we haven't been so successful that our collaborative spirit has been put at risk. And this gentleman had the next question. Come to you.
Well, thank you. 3 years ago, we had those terrible forest fires and it covered your area, I'm sure, with a lot of smoke. How did that affect your crops? And did you use that crop, or what did it have to be removed?
Yeah, no, it definitely affected us. The sheriff came and knocked on our door and said, there's a 900-acre fire a quarter of a mile up the canyon from where you live. I need you out of your house in 15 minutes. So that was interesting. Luckily, the wind was blowing away from the vineyard, but the big fires, the ones that were 200,000 acres, were just over the hill in the Cascades, and the whole Willamette Valley filled up with smoke for 14 days or so. It brings the very real issue of smoke effect on wine. Depends on how ripe the grapes are. When a grape is still green and not very ripe, it won't absorb the smoke impact as much as something that is ready to be picked. So it was a vineyard by vineyard decision. Some vineyards decided, game over, we're not harvesting anything this year. So to answer your question about Raptor Ridge, those, I have to steel myself a little bit. Those growers, they depend on our business, right? So a lot of my contracts are handshakes. I'm not going to walk up to somebody and say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to harvest. What we did do is we said, I don't know what kind of wine we're going to make until we harvest it, until we spent a fortune on laboratory analysis to see you know, vineyard by vineyard, what sort of impact. There are like 6 markers that you can see. So if there was something that had the markers for smoke impact, then we decided, can we fix the wine? Can we absorb it out using fining agents? Or can we make a wine that has other components in it that are, I call it a matrix, a large enough matrix that the smoke effect is just tucked inside of it and you don't see it. And so we did both things to kind of sharpen the point. High-end wineries will spend $1,000 a barrel to get, you know, French oak that's been toasted. And if you look at what is that toasted barrel is releasing into the wine, it's glycol, which is one of the markers of smoke taint. So like some cases you pay for it, and other places you're saying, oh, I'm afraid of it. We ended up with several of our vineyards that we declassified. We did not make a high-end Pinot Noir that had that vineyard's name on it. But we took the wine and we absorbed it out and we masked it as well and sold it. So, and I'm so glad we did, because you know, we needed the revenue and our growers needed the revenue. And we did sell that wine first, the 2020 vintage. It's all gone now. People have enjoyed it. And now we've reverted back to where we're selling through the 2019 vintage, which has just had another extra year of cellar age to it. So I feel that we dodged the bullet, and I've had no complaints about the wine. I wish more people had stood by their growers and, you know, worked through it with them. There were some people that, you know, they're ripping out their vineyards. That was the coup de grace. I'm going to grow grass. It's easier. Yeah, you probably had a question.
You mentioned your big markets were Oregon and California. You did not mention Washington. My impression of Washington is they make different kinds of wines than we do. They don't do a lot of Pinot Noir. It's Syrah and Cab and some of those much heavier wines. So where does Washington fit in your bailiwick of wines?
It's in the top 10. I can't remember exactly where it is, probably around number 8. Part of it is just, you know, what you're saying. The Washington community is loyal to their own growers. Good for them. And their growers are in Eastern Washington. There's not a lot that's been developed in, you know, the Puget Sound or whatnot. Could be, perhaps, but maybe it's too much of a rainforest. So in Eastern Washington and Eastern Oregon, very different climate, you know, hot, dry. Pinot Noir would get baked out. It would ripen too quickly and make an inferior wine, but Syrah, Cabernet, the Rhone varietals do wonderfully there. And they're a, you know, burgeoning wine industry, I think. Oregon has more vineyards and wineries, but I think Washington makes more wine. Washington's number 2 behind California in production of wine.
Oh, I think, last question.
I tasted some wine from an area that we had driven through, and the area we drove through, the houses were burned down where they were growing grapes. But somebody served us some of this, and I thought it was really quite interesting and quite good. It was a Chardonnay. And like you say, they spend a lot of money on those burned barrels. So
Yeah.
I think we just got the benefit of that without them having to spend that money. We liked it a lot.
Yeah, good. I'm glad you did. And the white wines, you know, the smoke effect gets absorbed into the skins. So with the white wines, you're harvesting and pressing the juice off instantly, not spending any time on the skin. So that could be working in your favor. But thank you all for supporting the wine industry. I've left little brochures out there.
Sounds like good barbecue wine.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you, Scott.